It's like a sound. Can you see something blue looking at me? I think Charles needs to put on it. He looks so ugly.
Stop playing with me.
And he looks like a monkey.
Stop playing.
That sucks. I love you.
Our focus today is on the heartbreaking story of 8-year-old Rica Rountree, a child whose life was marred by a system that failed to protect her. Rika's story is a chilling reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise when the signs of abuse are overlooked or ignored. In today's episode, we will delve into the details of this harrowing case, seeking answers to questions which continue to linger. How could a system fail so catastrophically? How could so many warning signs be overlooked? And what can we, as a society, learn from this tragic loss? Prepare yourself for an emotional journey as we uncover the heartbreaking story of Rica Rountree and shine a light on the dark corners of and the urgent need for change. Rica Rountree had known no other life than that of turmoil and instability. Her parents, Ann Simmons and Richard Rountree, had both battled addiction, and they fought frequently, with their fights often escalating into violence. It was 2014 when Rika first came into contact with the Department of Child and Family Services, known as DCFS. At the time, they received a report alleging that Ann was abusing her children. In the incident which prompted the report, Rika's sibling was admitted into a psychiatric facility after they reported being choked and thrown through a screen door by Ann. However, DCFS investigated the report and they found no record of any psychiatric hospital admission, and ultimately, they decided the incident never happened. 3 months later, DCFS received a report alleging that Ann was neglecting her children. By then, Rika had gone to live with her father, leaving 2 of her siblings in the care of their mother. The report was once again determined to be unfounded. A year later, Rika was back living with her mother, and there was another report. Yet again, the claims were determined to be unfounded. Over the next 2 years, multiple reports of a similar nature were made. Again and again, no action was taken, but all that changed in September 2016. Undercover officers reported to DCFS that they had bought cocaine from Ann while her children were inside the house. Her home was later raided in a drug bust, and Ann was taken into custody. After Ann's arrest, Rika was sent to stay with her father. If her life was bad before, it was about to get infinitely worse. Richard lived with his girlfriend Cynthia, as well as 3 of Cynthia's children. Her 2 daughters were aged 15 and 6 years old, and her son was 17 years old. Rika's 1-year-old biological sister also lived with the couple. Within months of going to live with her father, DCFS began to receive reports of Cynthia and Rika. At first, it was reported that Rika was being whipped with a belt. 6 months later, it was that Rika had cuts, welts and bruises all over her body from being beaten by her stepmother. Then she had a split lip, black eyes and scars on her neck. Next came broken teeth and a gash on her eye. But each and every time DCFS investigated the reports, they decided they were unfounded, and the reports were expunged from her father's record. There's only one instance in 2018 when a DCFS investigator decided to finally speak directly to Rika about what was going on. At the time, Rika had a visibly broken tooth and a gash over her eye, which was in the early stages of healing. When the investigator asked her how she got the injuries, Rika told them she had fallen over in the bathroom and her face had hit the medicine cabinet. She also told the investigators that she had broken her tooth when she fell on the drawer in her bedroom. When she was asked directly if anyone was hurting her, she denied there being any trouble at home. Despite the obvious, the investigator decided to take an injured 8-year-old at her word. The report about the incident stated that the claims of were unfounded. Despite the frequent reports to DCFS and the physical injuries all over Rika's face, her father and stepmother were granted permanent custody while Anne remained in jail. 6 months and 2 reports later, Rika was in hospital. On the 26th of January 2019, 8-year-old Rika was taken to the hospital after repeatedly complaining about pain in her stomach. Her vital signs were erratic and she was drifting in and out of consciousness. When she was laid on the bed for a physical examination, medical staff found a huge bruise wrapping almost entirely around her tiny abdomen. She was immediately whisked away for surgery. What doctors found while Rika was on the operating table would unravel a horrifying truth. They discovered that the cause of the external bruising was widespread internal injuries. The extent of the damage was devastating, and there was only one explanation. Rika had been beaten repeatedly. Her injuries hadn't come from a fall like the adults who brought her in had claimed. In fact, her injuries were so severe that there was no question that Rika had been and it wasn't a one-off. Her injury spoke of Rika being hurt over a prolonged period of time. On the day of her hospitalization, DCFS received a notification about Rika's injuries from the medical team. The team were extremely concerned that the other children living with Richard and Cynthia were at high risk of being hurt. The response to this report was the first time that DCFS took any action against the couple. That day, the other children in the home were removed and put into the care of relatives. Devastatingly, the action from DCFS was too little, too late for Rika. The damage which had been done to her internal organs were not survivable, and she died on the operating table. 5 days after she died, yet another report came in to say that Cynthia and Richard had violated the plan which had been put in place to keep her other children safe after Rika's death. Because of this violation, all of the children were put into protective custody, which came in the form of a foster home. Rika's death was almost incomprehensible, but it was her autopsy report that delivered the most horrific insight into the extent of the brutality she endured. The details revealed in her autopsy report were deeply disturbing and profoundly unsettling, and it is unfathomable to comprehend the level of violence inflicted upon her. Rika's autopsy showed that she had died from internal injuries after being hit in the stomach. More specifically, repeated kicks to her abdomen had resulted in peritonitis due to intestinal perforation from blunt force trauma. In other words, she had been kicked so hard that her intestines tore and she had bled out internally. Her death had been slow and painful, and Rika would have felt the life draining out of her body right up until the last moment of consciousness. That's what was going on inside her body. But on the outside, her skin told the story of years of. The autopsy revealed 67 marks across her head, neck, chest, back, arms, and legs. There were burns, gashes, scars, bruises, and unhealed wounds across her whole body. In fact, the medical examiner called her physical body a crime scene. When authorities began looking into Rika's death, they quickly realized that it was those who she should have been able to trust the most who had betrayed her in the most cruelest way possible. Rika had been in the full-time custody of her father and stepmother for more than 2 years when she died. There was simply no one else to blame for her injuries. And yet, when officials spoke to Cynthia and Richard, they denied knowing anything about how Rika had been injured. They claimed to love her, and they repeatedly mentioned that Rika was a clumsy child. They explained that all of her black eyes, bruises, and broken teeth were from her falling over or bumping her head. The night before they took Rika to the hospital, she had vomited at dinner and had almost fallen down the stairs. She told her dad she couldn't see, but Cynthia stated, "Sometimes she does this, and it's like attention, she's like pretending." Thankfully, for the first time since Rika moved in with her father, the authorities weren't so quick to believe Cynthia and Richard's stories, and they confiscated each of their cell phones. What they found on their devices shocked the most seasoned investigators. On Cynthia's phone, officers found multiple videos which had all been recorded in the months leading up to Rika's death. Every one of the videos showed a variation of the same thing: Cynthia repeatedly torturing this poor 8-year-old girl. In one of the videos, Cynthia can be heard telling Rika to take off all her clothes. She then demanded that the girl hold cans of food up for extended periods of time. Whenever Rika's arms gave up and dropped to her side, Cynthia would walk into the frame and put her hands around Rika's neck. She would then say, "Do I need to put a collar on you?" In other videos, she can be seen dragging Rika around the house by her neck. In another, she can be seen kneeing Rika in the back before slamming her head full force against a wall. While Cynthia's abuse is torturous and appalling to watch, there is one more disturbing fact that the videos revealed. Rika's father had not only known about the abuse against his daughter, he had participated in it. Rika's own father can be seen in the videos ordering her to stand on her head. And in others, he makes phone calls to Cynthia to ask how he should punish the child. On top of that, the other children living in the house can often be seen in the background of the videos. In fact, it seemed that they had become so desensitized to what was happening to Rika that, in many instances, they didn't react at all while she was being beaten or tortured. In their house, Rika's treatment was completely normalized. The videos have since been described as some of the most horrific evidence ever collected in a murder investigation. Then there are the text messages between Cynthia and Richard. In one, Cynthia wrote, "I love you too, but damn, I really hate your daughter." evidence collected during the investigation also revealed that Rika had been telling her father and stepmother about the pain in her stomach for days. Rika wasn't a regular attendee at school, which should have been another huge red flag. But Rika's teacher noticed that during the 12 days before Rika died, that she had shown up every day. One of the teachers recalled that Rika seemed out of sorts and was extremely tired. She became sickly looking and walked funnier as time went on. The day before she died, the teacher sent her to the nurse after Rika lay down on the carpet and looked like she was going to pass out. The nurse noticed a bruise on Rika's stomach, but the little girl once again denied that she was sick or that she was being hurt. It's profoundly difficult to comprehend the immense fear that must have consumed Rika, knowing that any attempt to escape or seek help could potentially lead to even greater harm at the hand of her own father and his girlfriend. The depth of her terror and the constant threats she lived under are both haunting and heartbreaking. Cynthia and Richard had been the ones to inflict the trauma upon Rika, but they had one opportunity to end her suffering when she begged for help the day before her death. And yet it was only when Rika fell completely unconscious at home that they sought any help and took her to the hospital. As you know, by then it was already too late. Ultimately, the investigation into Rika's death shed light on a shocking truth. It was the very individual she should have found comfort, support, and security in who had systematically brought about her painful and dreadful death. Cynthia was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated battery, endangering the life of a child, and domestic battery. Richard was charged with endangering the life of a child. 10 months after Rika's death, Cynthia's trial got underway. In court, Cynthia declined to testify, but through her lawyer, she stated she loved Rika and that she did not kill her. But when the jury was shown the footage taken from Cynthia and Richard's phones and the text messages between the pair, they could clearly see that Rika was treated with anything but love. Cynthia's own 7-year-old daughter also testified against her mother. She told the court she had watched her mother kick Rika in the stomach at least twice in the weeks before her stepsister died. The prosecutor summed it up accurately when he stated, "For the most part, it's unthinkable, but for Rika, it was normal." In the 407 Stanhope residence, Rika was treated less than, as this defendant's punching bag, and her pain served as entertainment for the entire family. Rika was battered and abused in front of every kid in this house. The prosecution also showed a letter Cynthia had written to Richard in which she had asked Richard to take the blame for everything. Her words were a clear indication that she knew what she had done, but even after her arrest, she thought she could get away with it. And why wouldn't she? She had managed to avoid getting in trouble even after years of DCFS investigations. Even when they had a child covered in gashes and bruises sitting in front of them, the DCFS investigators hadn't taken any action. Cynthia was found guilty of first-degree murder and faced a sentence of life in prison. During her sentencing hearing, Anne was given the opportunity to speak directly to Cynthia. "You beat and killed my daughter. Please accept that and let it go because I have. Everybody failed her. I failed her. My daughter should not have ever died. It should never have been this way." At the time of Rika's murder, Anne was serving 2.5 years in prison for forgery and aggravated DUI and not completing the terms of her probation. Rika died just 16 days after her mother was sent to prison. The judge agreed with the prosecution's argument, and in his ruling he stated, "Nothing that child did or could have done warranted that type of abuse that was inflicted upon her." Cynthia Baker, 42, was sentenced to spend the remainder of her natural life in prison.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Cynthia Baker, guilty of the offense of first-degree murder. It is signed by the foreperson and other 11 jurors. Next verdict provides, we, the jury, find the defendant, Cynthia Baker, guilty of the offense of aggravated battery to a child. Next verdict provides, we, the jury, find the defendant, Cynthia Baker, guilty of the offense of endangering the life or health of a child. Next verdict provides, we, the jury, find the defendant, Cynthia Baker, guilty of the offense of domestic battery.
Immediately after the sentencing, Cynthia had the audacity to file an appeal for a retrial due to apparent ineffective assistance from counsel. Her appeal was denied. Richard's trial was due to get underway in early 2020, but he was offered a plea agreement. The prosecutor acknowledged that Richard wasn't the instigator of the abuse, but that he did not protect his child or intervene while the abuse was being carried out. He also participated in some of the physical and emotional pain that Rika experienced. In exchange for pleading guilty, Richard was sentenced to only 8 years imprisonment, the same number of years his child was able to live before he participated in her systematic murder. During the plea hearing, Richard's defense lawyer read a short statement on his behalf. "I should have protected her better, and I'm sorry." But the words were cold comfort for Anne, who stated, "Whatever the sentence is, it will never be enough. Rika was 8 years old, and you are her dad. You were supposed to be protecting her from the pain you brought to her. I feel like you deserve to die in prison." In response to Rika's death, DCFS carried out a review of how her case had been handled. They stated, DCFS is deeply saddened by the loss of Rica Rountree. During her time with her father, DCFS conducted multiple investigations into allegations of abuse and found these allegations to be unfounded. There is currently a pending investigation into this death, and we are committed to understanding exactly what happened in this case and being fully transparent with the public. DCFS is working closely with the new administration to review our practices, policies, and procedures in order to fully live up to our mission to protect vulnerable children in Illinois. 4 months after Rika was murdered, the investigator responsible for her case, Patricia Shannon, was suspended for just 7 days for her handling of Rika's case. The investigation revealed that one of the people who reported that she suspected Rika was being abused was her teacher. Patricia never interviewed the teacher, and she didn't separate Cynthia and Richard when she asked them about what had caused Rika's injuries. Patricia was later promoted to a more senior position in DCFS. For more than 2 long years, Rica Rountree suffered in silence, trapped in a world of torment at the hands of the very people who should have provided love, care, and protection. Instead of shielding Rika from the horrors of the world, they became the source of her deepest anguish. The abuse endured by Rika was a poorly concealed secret, obvious to anyone who saw her, and yet easily dismissed by those entrusted with her protection. Child Services, tasked with safeguarding vulnerable children like Rika, repeatedly received reports and pleas for help. However, their responses were tragically inadequate, and Rika's cries for assistance went unheard. This heart-wrenching tale brings to light the flaws and shortcomings within a system designed to ensure the welfare of children. Following her release from prison, Anne has dedicated her life to raising awareness about the rights and needs of child victims. Her tireless efforts aim to ensure that the Department of Children and Family Services recognizes the urgency and gravity of their responsibilities. She emphasizes the importance of implementing robust protocols, improving training programs, and increasing resources to provide care for society's most vulnerable individuals. If you're wrong, but at least you did your job. Do due diligence. Do your part. Rika told people, and because Rika was articulate and was able to speak, she wasn't taken seriously. Because Rika was able to come in and say, "These things are happening to me," in a way that wasn't how the book says it was supposed to look, it wasn't taken seriously. People that are mandated to speak on behalf of our kids, they need to either stop working in their jobs and let someone else come in that's going to protect our kids, or they need to do their jobs because Rika didn't need to die. Rika's life was taken by those who were supposed to love and protect her. May her sweet soul rest in peace.